A book on the Sri Lankan Civil War always runs the risk of getting mired in propaganda and too much of political clout that the author might miss the wood for the trees. But in this novel, author Anuk Arudpragasam has made sure that he's keeping it grounded and he tries to explore the psyche and individual trauma, which makes a novel a wonderful read. And when you turn the last page, you feel abandoned as the protagonist. Hi, this is Gautam, and for today's review, we'll be looking at one of the novels which was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize, A Passage North by author Anuk Arudpragasam. The story's protagonist is Krishnan. He's a Sri Lankan Tamil who lives in Colombo. The story starts with Krishnan receiving a phone call that Rani, who used to be his grandmother's caretaker, has passed away in an accident. Now, Rani lives or lived in Northern Sri Lanka, and Krishnan feels that it is obligatory for him to make the journey to attend the funeral because Rani was very close to the family in the 2 years during which she stayed with them in Colombo. So when he starts to take the train journey to Northern Sri Lanka, slowly the landscape of the post-war, post-war country is revealed in front of our eyes. Now, the story is mostly a recollection of two different events, and they're spread throughout the novel. It's that one overlaps with the other. And one part of the story is about Krishnan's experiences in India when he stayed there as a graduate student, and the other part is the narration of Rani's life from the eyes of Krishnan. Now, readers may not be able to make the association, or they might find some dissonance between the two parts. Because one is set in Sri Lanka and one is set in India, and they deal with totally two different things. So you may not really find the connection between them because there were certain segments in which I felt that I was not able to really relate to one part and was more closely able to connect with the other. But I think it is left to you because I believe the author had written the first part in India or one part in India and the other in Sri Lanka primarily to make sure to get a perspective of an outsider or looking at an event from not from the place's perspective but from an outsider perspective, or maybe he wanted to address issues which are associated with identity, or maybe the concept that in spite of wherever or whichever part of the world you are in, conflicts about to happen, because even in India he talks about different caste divisions, religious divisions which are in existence. So the two-part, not exactly a two-part division, but the fact that the two storylines run parallelly along with each other may not find resonance with all the readers, but I'm pretty sure it's more of experimental and some might actually like it really well. The story, which is set in India during his graduation time, primarily revolves around his relationship with a woman Anjum, whom he meets in Delhi in one of the queer events. So here you actually look at how the Krishnan adopts to the situation in Delhi, and you also get to see that when he comes to India, he looks at things quite differently. For example, let's take Buddhism, and there is a passage in the novel which talks about what Buddhism might mean from two different perspectives, because it is always considered as a pacifist religion, especially when you look at when you visualize the image of Buddha. So here it goes, this is in page 181. Growing up, he associated Buddhism mainly with the Sri Lankan government and army, with the statues they constructed all over the country to remind Muslims, Tamils and other minorities of their place. And it was only during his time in India, ironically, as he finally began learning more about Buddhism's history, that he began considering it as a religion or philosophy in its own right. It was during this time in Delhi that he learned that Buddhism was viewed as a religion of emancipation among the oppressed castes in India, that at one time there had been Tamil Buddhists in the south of India and even in northeast Sri Lanka, that most Sri Lankans called Buddhism was in fact just one particular version of Buddhism. So this was the concept of perspective I was discussing, that when you put yourself in a different location and place, something which you realize or something which you think is if something very familiar to you might seem very different. So the question of perspective is addressed, and maybe that is the reason author tried to give a good proportion of the story to his experiences, or not his experiences, of course, the protagonist's experiences which is set in India. If you look at the second segment, it is about Rani. Now, of course, Krishnan is not physically affected by the Sri Lankan civil war like most Tamils who are around the world, but once the civil war is over, he makes sure that he travels frequently to the north to help in rehabilitation measures, and that is when Krishnan comes across Rani, who's in mental trauma because she has lost both her sons as a result of civil war. So hoping that in consultation with the doctor that a change of place for Rani, leaving the war-torn place and moving somewhere else would definitely bring a relief. Hoping that would happen, he, along with the doctor's permission, takes Rani and comes back to Colombo, and there she becomes close to the family, and she takes care of his Appa, his paternal grandmother. Now, the portions which were associated with the aftermath of the war could not have been written better, and that's what makes this novel poignant. It's as if you are in the place, you feel the characters and the events transforming around you. There were certain segments which, where there are recollection of the actual events which seem too political and that could have been avoided, but still that can definitely be excused. And there is this concept of trying to move away from a place, trying to migrate away from a traumatic place. And just try to read this passage, why refugees, in spite of the fact that they know that once they try to move away from this place of conflict, they may not be accepted elsewhere. In spite of the fact that they know that, why do they take that risk? He's exploring this. The majority of the people who'd lost everything during the war, people who, even if they hadn't been detained, raped, tortured or raped, have seen untold amounts of violence, for whom life in their homeland had become more or less unbearable. It was true probably that severe trauma could never be escaped, that you carried it with you wherever you went. But trauma, Krishna knew, was so indelibly linked to the physical environments in which it was experienced, to specific sounds, images, languages and times of day, as a result of which it was often impossible for people to continue living in the places they have seen violence occur. It was often hard, he'd read somewhere, to convince a person who'd had a serious car accident to get back into the car. Many such people preferring to take other modes of transport whenever they could from then on. And if this was the case with car accidents, then how much harder must it have been to convince people to remain in places they had been bombarded by shelling, places they had come face to face with punctured bodies and severed limbs. So this stands as an account for exploring the issue associated with refugees and asylum seekers across the world. And that is where the novel really succeeds, because at the end, when you see the final rites for Rani being performed and the events associated or surrounding that, where he tries to speculate, the protagonist realizes that whatever you try, you will never be able to escape the horror. And there are very small subplots which makes the novel memorable. For example, in Colombo there is a Ganesh statue which is called as Visa Pillayar again. It's a reference to Lord Ganesh, who is one of the important gods in Hinduism, who is considered as a remover of obstacles. So there is a Visa Pillayar or Visa Ganesh, where people go to the temple and pray to him for visa. And since he grants visa, that's how the name sticks on to the god. And there was a small segment where he explores strangers looking at each other into the eye, where this incident kind of happens in the Delhi metro station. And he talks about privacy, he talks about violence. Thus, just by a stranger staring at an individual, you can intrude and disturb a person's privacy, and maybe invite him for conflict. So not just these two subplots, but there were memorable bits here and there, and the novel is a complete package as an experience which you would feel exploring different emotions which you would normally like to, because not all emotions are always happy and Wonderful. So do get this novel, and if possible, if you've read this novel, do post in the comment section how you felt regarding the two different segments. One's which is set in India and which is in Sri Lanka, or have I missed anything? So that's it for today's review, and I will meet you with the next novel soon.